Hello everyone, and welcome to a new video where we are going to dive into the world of dinosaurs. We are going to do it through these figures, with which we will learn a lot of interesting information about dinosaurs. For that, we will use several books, including the Great Book of Dinosaurs. Let's open the book at random to learn new things about a surprise dinosaur, and here we have an armored dinosaur. It's called Sauropelta, and it belongs to the Ankylosaur family. Although we see some differences, here we can appreciate a fantastic illustration where you can see what it really looked like. As you can see, its skin was very thick, sturdy, almost impenetrable. In addition, it also had several super large spikes in the neck area, which was its weakest spot. Therefore, these large spikes prevented the big carnivores from being able to sink their teeth into it. Unlike the great Ankylosaurus, we can see that the Sauropelta did not have the large ball or club at the tip of its tail. Now that we've learned some information about this dinosaur, let's take a look at the three dinosaurs we have today. First, we have the great Stegosaurus. Second, a feathered dinosaur called Caudipteryx. And third, the great Triceratops. Let's start by learning a lot of information about the great Stegosaurus. As you can see, this figure is impressive. It's made of hard plastic, which means we can't move the head or the legs. However, I love it because it has all the details. We can notice various textures and colors on its skin. As you know, the Stegosaurus was characterized by the large bony plates on the top of its body. These bony plates were divided into two large rows. In addition, they were much smaller at the back of its head and gradually became larger, reaching their greatest height and width at the back. In addition, it also used a great method of defense that it had at the tip of its tail. As you can see, it had four large spikes, which it used by swinging its tail side to side to defend against predators. Therefore, it had very large and robust hind legs, since it needed to have a lot of strength in the back part to swing its tail with great force. Another interesting fact is that its head was very small compared to the rest of its body. Also, like other herbivores, it had a strong beak at the tip of its mouth, which it used to dig in the ground in search of food. What I like most about this figure is that if we turn it around, we can see the skeleton with its fossil remains. Impressive! As you can see, some dinosaur bones were gigantic, like, for example, the bones in their legs and also their bony plates. However, it also had other tiny bones, like those that made up its spine or the tip of its tail. Fossil remains are studied through paleontology. Let's discover more information in the book. We have more information about fossils. It tells us that they are organic remains that have been naturally preserved over millions of years. All of them have usually formed at the bottom of the sea or at the bottom of lakes. That is, when a living organism has died in an area with water. Here we even have an example of a fossil of an insect preserved in amber. But plant remains could also become fossilized, as well as dinosaur bones. It tells us that for a dinosaur fossil to have lasted for millions of years, a dinosaur had to have died in an area with water. These bones have remained underground for millions of years. And with the fracturing of the Earth, due to the collision of tectonic plates, these sediments have started to rise. That's how paleontologists have been able to unearth all the bones that have come to the surface. For that, they use many tools, such as toothbrushes and paintbrushes, to carefully unearth all the fossil remains. Now we know more about dinosaurs, especially the Stegosaurus. We can also specify that it could reach about 9 meters in length, from the tip of its mouth to the end of its tail. It lived on Earth during the Jurassic period, over 155 million years ago. Let's move on to the second dinosaur. Look, what a cool figure. This is a Caudipteryx. As you can see, it was a feathered dinosaur. Its whole body was covered in feathers. Even though it had feathers all over its body and front legs that looked like wings, the Caudipteryx couldn't fly. What it could do, though, was glide. I like the figure because it's also articulated. We can move both the hind legs and the wings. Slightly. It comes in an electric blue color, with the tips of the feathers in red. Here we can see its front legs. It had 2 toes with 2 small claws on its head, and we can also see a lot of feathers. Its neck was slightly long, and it obviously had a strong beak that it used to eat. In the Encyclopedia, we find information about Caudipteryx. It tells us that it was also called the Cretaceous turkey. It looked like a type of bird, but it wasn't one. Also, on the left side, we see the complete fossil remains of its skeleton. Impressive! Regarding the dino facts, it specifies that it could reach about 78 centimeters in length, 1 meter in height, and weigh up to 2.3 kilograms at most. That is, it wasn't very heavy. On the contrary, it was quite light, which allowed it to run at high speed. And, as I was saying, it could make big jumps and try to glide, although of course it couldn't fly. And we still have to see the last of the dinosaurs. It's a very famous dinosaur that I'm sure all of you already know. It's the great Triceratops, a dinosaur with a crown-shaped skull. Also, as you can see, it stands out due to the 3 large horns on its head. These 2 horns, which were right above its eyes, could reach almost 1 meter in length, while the 3rd horn was much smaller. As you can see, it was right between its nostrils. It also had a strong beak, which is characteristic of most herbivores. For example, Triceratops loved to eat tough roots, so it would dig underground in search of these roots. Using this strong beak up close, we can even appreciate the detail of its tongue. In addition, Triceratops could defend itself by charging when a predator came near. It used its head and horns to protect itself. They even lived in groups or herds, so there was strength and unity. If a Tyrannosaurus rex came to attack, they would all form a big line of Triceratops together and charge until the predator ran away or left. Look closely. We can see what would be its skull. Here we can see some holes, which would be the openings of its nasal bones, and here its eyes. We can even observe its teeth. We can see all its bones, and also how the bones in its legs were formed. It had 4 toes on each of them, and that allowed it to support its weight very well in a quadrupedal way, meaning using all 4 legs. In the book, we have more information about those dinosaurs with crown-shaped skulls, that is, with huge horns on their heads. Look, on this side, we have the Triceratops, which was the largest of them all, but there were many different species, some bigger, some smaller, with different head shapes. It tells us, for example, that the Pentaceratops could reach about 6 meters long. On the other hand, we had the Torosaurus, which also had 3 horns, but the top part of its head was different. As you can see, it lacked side spikes. The Torosaurus grew up to 7.5 meters long. Here, we have the great Triceratops, which tells us it was the largest of all, reaching about 9 meters in length as an adult. It tells us that its body was very similar to that of modern rhinoceroses, but obviously of a gigantic size. Up here, it shows us the names of other dinosaurs with crown-shaped skulls, and we can see the difference in size. Great! And now we've finished today's video. Here we have the 3 dinosaurs we've learned a lot of interesting information about. If you liked this video and want to discover more information about dinosaurs, you can help me by giving me a super like, a thumbs up, and I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos. And now, I'm saying goodbye to you all. See you in the next video with more amazing dinosaurs. Hello everyone, and welcome to a new video where we dive once again into the fantastic world of dinosaurs. And we're doing it to get to know an impressive specimen. It's the great Stegosaurus, a herbivorous dinosaur that lived on planet Earth during the Jurassic period. Also, in today's video, we are joined by 2 other dinosaurs. On one hand, we have a carnivorous dinosaur, the Spinosaurus. Later, we'll talk a bit about him and mention some of his characteristics. Secondly, we are also joined by the great Triceratops, known for its crown-shaped skull and the 3 horns it had on its head. Also, in today's video, we will be using the Great Book of Dinosaurs. You already know that I love to use it, because inside we have a lot of interesting information about all of them. For example, here it talks about the Centrosaurus. As you can see, it's a dinosaur from the Triceratops family. There were many different species with crown-shaped skulls, but each of them had their own particularities. And now, let's uncover our big Stegosaurus and discover a lot of interesting facts. In the box, we can already see that it looks like we're in the middle of a paleontological excavation. On this side, we're seeing the skull of a big Tyrannosaurus rex. As you can see, it was full of sharp teeth. It had a total of 60 teeth in its jaw. Also, on the side, it tells us the history of dinosaurs and says that it goes back 235 million years. It also specifies that they can move both their legs and tail, as well as their jaw. Although in this case, since it's a herbivore, I think it won't be able to move its jaw. Let's explore all the details. We'll keep this plastic to recycle it in the yellow container. And here we have the figure. For now, I love the colors it has. It's gray with some details in black, yellow, and purple. The Stegosaurus is one of my favorite herbivores, especially because of the way it defended itself. As you can see, it was covered with large spikes on the top. Also, do you know what these large plates were for? It's because the Stegosaurus had the weakest part of its body right in the upper center. Therefore, it was very easy for large predators to come and sink their teeth in. Therefore, by having these large bony plates, it prevented them from being able to sink their teeth and jaws in. A good way to defend itself. It also used its large defensive tail swipe. As you can see, it had a long tail with 4 large spikes at the tip, which it used by swinging from side to side when a predator came. See, this is the reason why it has larger and more robust hind legs, since it needed a lot of strength in the back to be able to swing its tail forcefully. Another interesting detail about the Stegosaurus is that it had a very small head compared to the rest of its body, so its brain was tiny. Like other herbivores, it also had a small beak at the tip of its mouth. It was something characteristic of herbivores that use their beaks to dig in the ground in search of food. Also, I like the figure. It's quite big. As you can see, it's bigger than my hand, and it's also articulated. I love that because we can put the dinosaur in different poses and positions, lying down, crouching down, or even standing up. As if it were eating leaves from the trunk of a tree. Super cool. And now it's time to learn more information in the Dino Facts. It tells us that it could reach between 7 and 9 meters in length, from the tip of its mouth to the end of its long tail. In addition, it could weigh between 4 and 7 tons. As you know, it fed on, or its diet consisted of low vegetation in arid areas and also fruits. It also tells us that its name means lizard with a roof. In addition, we have a lot more information in this area. And what I like the most is what we have around here. A real-life photograph with the fossilized plate of an impressive Stegosaurus. Now that we've seen our great Stegosaurus, should we briefly introduce the other dinosaurs with us? Over here, we have a super predator. It's a great Spinosaurus. As you know, its name means lizard with spines, and that's because of the large crest of spines it has. On the upper dorsal part of its body, the crest of spines could reach about 2 meters in height. The jaw of the Spinosaurus was quite distinctive, as it was very long and wide. It really resembles the shape of the jaws of modern-day alligators and crocodiles. I like the figure because we can also open and close its jaw, revealing its teeth and even the details of its tongue and palate. As you can see, not all the teeth were the same. Some were smaller and others were longer so they could sink them into their prey. It also had a slightly long neck and, as you can see, was a bipedal dinosaur. It mainly walked on its hind legs. However, the front legs were also quite long, as you can see, so sometimes it also walked in a quadrupedal way, meaning it used all 4 legs on the ground. Spinosaurus was also an excellent swimmer. It was a type of carnivore that loved to dive into the water, since that's where its main prey was found. Yes, friends, it mainly fed on aquatic animals, that is, on fish or marine reptiles. It was about 17 meters long in those adult male specimens, meaning it was a giant among giants. It was also called the sail dinosaur because usually, in order to hunt, it would submerge its entire body underwater, leaving only its sail exposed. The crest of spines, therefore, looked like a sailboat. It lived on Earth during the Cretaceous period, over 65 million years ago. And now we have one last dinosaur to meet. We have one of the most well-known herbivorous dinosaurs, especially because it has appeared in many television shows, movies, and has been represented with many figures. As you can see, it is characterized by its large crown-shaped skull and 3 spikes or horns at the front. It has 2 much longer horns above each of its eyes, and the 3rd horn, as you can see, is much smaller, located in the center of its nose. It also has a strong beak, as you can see, with a hook-shaped tip. As I was telling you, it used it to dig in the ground looking for tough roots, which it loved to eat. Another detail is that on the sides of its entire crest, it had spikes that weren't very big, but were hard enough to defend itself from predators that tried to attack. Also, the Triceratops could defend itself from predators because it lived in groups or herds. Therefore, even though they were smaller than, for example, the great Tyrannosaurus rex, altogether they formed a group and started to charge powerfully with their heads and their horns. Impressive! As you can see, it's a quadruped that walks on all 4s and has a long tail. And now we are done. In today's video, we saw 3 great dinosaurs. On one hand, the Stegosaurus, the Spinosaurus, and finally, the Triceratops. If you enjoyed today's video and want to know more about all these animals, you can help me by giving me a super like, a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel to catch every video. Goodbye, everyone. See you in the next video with more amazing dinosaurs. Goodbye.